After laying out the reasons that Turing thinks that machines can think, he considers objections to thinking machines, objections that have been raised to the whole idea that machines can think, and he considers those objections and considers responses to those. This is classic philosophical argument, considering objections and responding to those objections. So as we go through these different objections, we'll just consider 6 of them. Think about which ones are strong, which ones make sense to you, which are ones that you have towards machine consciousness, and then think about the responses. Does Turing do a good job in responding to these objections? The first objection is a theological objection. So you might think that God gives human souls, and the soul is the seat of the mind and consciousness, and so, machines don't have those. Machines are made by humans, and so they don't have souls. And if the soul is what makes a mind, for example, if you're a dualist and you think the mind is non-physical, then nothing physical is there for the machine. The non-physical soul is not there for the machine to have a mind or to have consciousness, according to the theological objection. Now, a response to this objection is that God could give computers souls. You might think, well, another objection is that humans don't have souls. The soul isn't the seat of consciousness or the mind. That's another possible explanation. But you also might accept that dualism is true. You might be a dualist and you want to address the whole crux of the issue of dualism, in which case you could say there's no reason that God wouldn't give a soul to a computer. If it's non-physical, it could be attached to anything. That's precisely the problem with dualism. We have no idea how a soul gets attached, how a mind gets attached to a body, how do they communicate. The causal relations between the mind and body is precisely the mystery with dualism. So given that it's an entire mystery and you're interested in machine consciousness, you could say, well, there's no reason that that mystery wouldn't apply to computers just as well as it applies to physical human bodies and maybe animal bodies. So God could give souls to computers. And I have the picture of the Iron Giant here because in watching this animated movie many years ago, I was struck by this movie. The boy Hogarth is discussing death with the Iron Giant, and Hogarth's reasoning is that you can think and feel. That is to say, the Iron Giant thinks and feels, and that was demonstrated by the Iron Giant's sadness over the death of a deer. So if you can think and feel, that means you have a soul. A soul can't be destroyed, and so you won't die. So, Iron Giant's worried about dying, as are we all. It's one of the reasons that motivates dualism. And so Hogarth wants to comfort the Iron Giant and say, you have a soul. We can see that you have a soul. So, why not? Why not say that computers can have minds and consciousness? If God gives them, there's no reason why God wouldn't give them to machines. So one possible response, you can think again, is the objection a strong objection? Is the response a strong response? Maybe you think both are bad. Maybe you think one is good, one is bad. These are the things to think about when thinking about objections and responses. The second objection here is the head in the sand objection, and it just gets a little corner of a slide because Turing doesn't take it very seriously, and I don't know that it's a very serious objection. It seems like a fairly weak objection. The head in the sand objection is those people who say, no, we just can't think about machine consciousness or machine minds because that would be too scary. Artificial intelligence is just too scary, so I'm just not going to think about it. And Turing says, well, get over it. It might happen, and it's not a scary thing, and humans aren't the most superior, most intelligent beings in the world, and you might think that you are, but we can reproduce those things in a machine. So really, consolation or some therapy maybe is what this objector needs and not a serious intellectual argument. So again, you think about, is this as weak as Turing thinks it is? And maybe it's not, now that we've got more clever artificial intelligence, and people are seriously worried about the robot apocalypse, the possibility that robots could take over the world, maybe a worry about machines thinking and thinking better than us, the singularity and so forth. Maybe this is more of a concern than Turing really gives it credit for back in the day. The third objection is the mathematical objection. This is perhaps one of the ones that's most technical and therefore most difficult to grasp. According to the mathematical objection, logical systems are limited. There are non-computable functions. Some examples of non-computable functions are self-justification questions. So Gödel incompleteness is proved that a system is incomplete in that it cannot contain a proof of itself as a system. And so, there is, it's non-computable when you ask it, how can you prove that you exist, for example? How can you prove that you are true? The system can't provide an answer to that question. That's a non-computable function. Another one is logical paradoxes. So you see the image there, the statement below is false and the statement above is true. Those are incompatible. It's a logical paradox. And so this is also something that a computer system couldn't, if you said which of these statements is true, there's no way to answer that sort of question. And so the argument is that, these non-computable functions undermine the capacity for machines to think. They can't produce outputs to these questions. And the response to that, I think, is perfectly reasonable, which is that humans are also limited. Computers are limited. A computer can't answer every question, but people can't answer every question. In fact, computers can answer a lot more questions than I can answer. So if it's a matter of computing, then computers are better at computing than humans are. And so, so it doesn't seem like being able to answer every question, being able to compute every input into an output is a good criterion for being a thinker. It may be a criterion for being the best thinker or perfect thinker, but it's not a criterion for being a thinker at all. And so this seems to me like a poor objection and a good response. Going on to the fourth for our class is the most important argument, the most important objection, and that's the argument from consciousness. And because it's the most important, we'll spend an entire lecture discussing that. Later on, we'll look at Searle's argument from consciousness. As Turing considers it here, he thinks about the sorts of things that are that seem to require consciousness. A sonnet or a concert emerges from emotions, and only something with feelings can produce them. So you need conscious feelings in order to produce something like a sonnet or a concert. A computer doesn't have feelings, it doesn't have emotions, it's not conscious, and so it couldn't produce these things. And these things are part of what it is to think, part of what it is to be a mind, is to have the ability to produce a sonnet or a concert, and a computer couldn't do that because it's not conscious. Now, the response to this then, two responses. The response is in the form of a dilemma. A dilemma is either it is or it isn't, and it can't be either one of those. And so the dilemma here is either this is a solipsistic position. Solipsism is the view that one is the only, a person is the only being that's conscious. I am the only conscious being. Solipsism is the idea that I'm the only conscious being. So if you think of Descartes at the time of the second meditation, before Descartes proves that everything else, the world and everybody else exists, that's a kind of solipsism. I can only be sure that I'm the one that's conscious. I can't be sure that anybody else is conscious. And solipsism seems to be a bad view. Nobody wants to be a solipsist. You want there to be other conscious beings in the world. It seems a little arrogant to think I'm the only one that's conscious. And Turing thinks, yeah, so this is not a good position. And if you're not a solipsist, if you think that other humans are conscious, then you must think that other computers can be conscious. The same criteria apply to thinking that other humans are conscious as you would apply to computers. So this is the Turing test. I think that a person is conscious, and the same criteria go into thinking that the machine is conscious. It responds to my questions, and that's, those are the criteria that I use to think about consciousness. Alternatively, if it's not solipsistic, that is to say, if I think that there are criteria that I can use, then I can apply tests like the Turing test to other beings. So this is going to be what Searle is going to object to with his Chinese room argument in our next lecture. And Searle is going to say, well, the tests that apply to humans for consciousness really don't apply appropriately to machines. So this is going to be the issue with respect to the second. So either you're going to be a solipsist and you're the only one that's conscious, or you're going to have the same criteria to apply to humans and machines, and to see if they are conscious. And the question at issue is whether the same criteria apply to humans and to machines. So that's at issue with consciousness. Can we apply the same criteria to humans and to machines if we're not solipsists? So that's objection number 4. Objection number 5 is the argument from disabilities. The argument that a computer can't do something, can't do X. And there are a number of different abilities that humans have that it looks like computers don't have, and have been used to argue that if a computer can't do X, then a computer is not a person. It's not thinking, it's not a mind. And here's the list, and you might think which one of these you think is convincing in terms of, well, a computer can't do that, and so therefore it's not a mind. A computer can't be kind or resourceful, appreciate beauty, be friendly, assertive, humorous, moral, make mistakes. This one is really interesting to me. A lot of students that I've had over the years want to argue that humans make mistakes and computers don't make mistakes, so that's what makes us have a mind and a computer doesn't have a mind. And it's interesting to think about that as the hallmark of mental capacity, is to make mistakes. And if you're inclined to say that making mistakes is what makes you have a mind, is what makes something be a mind, think more about that. Why does making mistakes constitute having a mind? And is that related to consciousness or not related to consciousness, and why? So think about this idea of making mistakes, if that's the one that you think is critical. Or fall in love, enjoy strawberries and cream. Those two might involve consciousness. Remember sonnets and concerts from the argument from consciousness. Maybe it's the feelings, the emotions that are critical, and some of these others seem to involve emotions as well. Maybe that's critical to having a mind. If so, how? Think about what the relationship is between having emotions and having a mind. Other ones on this list: learn from experience, and here you can think about the difference between a computational system and a connectionist system. It looks like connectionist systems do learn from experience by being trained by inputs and outputs. So might that be a difference in terms of choosing a connectionist system over a computational system in terms of learning from experience? And then the last one is being the subject of its own thoughts, being self-reflective. So if a computer can examine its own states in some way or another, would that be sufficient to be a mind? So these are various items on the list. You may want to add things to this list in terms of this argument, in terms of thinking about the power of this objection against the idea that computers can think. In response to everything on this list and everything that you might come up with, what Turing wants to say is that it's a faulty induction. Though previous computers can't do X, future computers may be able to do that thing. So maybe computers right now aren't kind, but we can make computers in the future to be kind. Could we, is the question in response to this. Could we make computers that have feelings? What would that involve? What would it involve to make computers have feelings? Would it simply be a matter of the kinds of inputs and outputs discussed in the argument from consciousness, objection number 4. So think about this one, is there some particular kind of thing that a computer can't do? And could a future computer be able to do that thing? And maybe that thing is to be creative. This is the 6th objection, also a very powerful objection to computers thinking. It's called Lady Lovelace's objection because she was the one at the time that Turing was writing that raised this objection forcefully. A computer cannot create an original thought. So creativity seems to be really important to being a mind, and if computers are programs, as Lady Lovelace suggests, then it can't be original. And in response to this objection, Turing says 2 possible responses: that computers might be creative if they can learn. So again, can there be learning algorithms? This is now a kind of common term that we have. What constitutes a learning algorithm, and if computers can instantiate a learning algorithm, if we can train computers how to learn from experience, then there's no reason that that computer couldn't learn how to be creative, couldn't use its programs to create new thoughts, to learn new things. And the second response is that computers are surprising. Computers have been able to compute information in various ways that seem to produce novel outputs. And so this sort of surprise seems to be what creativity involves. Putting together existing pieces of information in ways that produce new responses. So if that's something that a computer is capable of, then that seems to respond to this worry about creativity, that there can be novelty for computers. So think about these 6 objections. Again, we'll talk more about the argument from consciousness when we talk about Searle, and think about which arguments are the strongest, which ones make you think, yeah, this is a worry about computers being able to have minds, to be thinking, and things that we need responses to. So in terms of this class, thinking about consciousness, you might think about whether you can separate whether machines can think from whether they can be conscious. You might be inclined to say, well, yeah, we can make thinking machines, we can make machines that are minds, even if they never achieve the level of consciousness. Even if they're not conscious, we may be able to separate what it is to be a mind, what it is to be thinking, from what it is to be conscious. So that's one of the things that you can think about with respect to artificial intelligence and artificial consciousness. These are now in the literature separated, AI and AC, and they might come apart. So if you think that they don't come apart, think about why. Why might you need to be conscious in order to be able to think? Or if you think that they can come apart, do you think that a machine could have one or the other without the other? And what would that involve?